Hi everybody, thanks for joining me for Coffee and Card at Home. So today we are starting to use a new stamp set, and these are the cards that we are going to make. So this uses the Peaceful Deer stamp set, and we will be using the coordinating punch as well, but today we're just stamping. So first of all, you are going to need a card base. Now I've used some bases that I got from Sale-a-Bration a few months ago, which are the nice patterned ones where they have the pattern side on that side and then they're white inside and on the back. But if you don't have any of those, you could always cut yourself your own card base. And I think this is slightly wider than a C6, but a C6 would be fine. You're kind of looking for a green shade, so kind of pale green, sort of like pale papaya or mint macaron or something along those lines. And then we've got two rectangles of basic white card that we're using. Which, just to check the measurements for you, are 4 centimetres by 13. So 4 centimetres by 13. And we're going to do our stamping on those, and then we're going to place them on the card slightly apart from each other just there. So let's make a start on the stamping. I'm just going to put my base to one side. So I'm using some of the deer images. So I'm using this one here and then the antlers that go with it to make it a stag. I'm also using this deer that's lying down. And then I'm using the medium-sized trees, which there's a few trees there which you could use a bit of a selection of all of them if you wanted to. And then for my sentiment, I'm using Sending Love and Peace this season. So I'm going to start off stamping my deer that's lying down, and for the outline I'm using Early Espresso. It just, obviously it's brown, which helps with the colour of the deer, but also it's slightly less harsh than you'd get if you used Memento Black. So that's my deer stamped, and whilst I've got my brown out, I'm just going to stamp my other deer on the other side. And of course, because of the size of the card, it won't fit on completely, so I'm just going to stamp it so that you can see the front of its body. And then just whilst I've got the Early Espresso there, just going to add on the antlers. Obviously you could do it without antlers if you wanted to, but I quite like stags, so that's why I went with that. Then there's also a stamp in the set, which is this one here, which is just like to give the ground some texture. So I have used that with Crumb cake, and I'm just going to place that underneath both of my deer just to give it some kind of texture with the snow there. And then finally I'm going to get my trees stamped on. So I've used Old Olive, but you could use any shade of green. And you could do some stamping off if you wanted them to look like they were further into the distance. So I'm just stamping one set at the top there. And on the other piece, I'm going to stamp a couple of them. And I'm trying to make sure that I leave a gap at the top to put my sentiment on. So on one of my samples, I have put it down at the bottom, so you can change where you place it, but this time I'm going to put it at the top. And so for the sentiment, I'm using Real Red to coordinate with my red bow, but you could use a different colour bow and then coordinate your sentiment to go with it if you wanted to. So now we just need to colour in our deer. So I'm using Cajun, Craze and Early Espresso, which are from both of the watercolour packs. I'm using Cajun Craze as my main colour. And then I'm just going to use the Early Espresso for a little bit of shading to just give it a little bit more depth of colour. So obviously, because they are watercolour pencils, you could use watercolour paper instead. And then you could use an aqua painter or a water pen. But what I quite like to do is when I'm using the standard white card, which is not quite thick enough to coat with water, I quite like to use a blender pen just to kind of blend together all my lines from colouring. So then you don't have to worry quite so much if you're maybe not quite as neat as you would have liked, because the blender pen will just magically blend all of that together. So I'm just going to put a few little extra bits around just to say, just have a bit of added depth. It's kind of on some of those areas where you know you might see a bit of extra shading. And again, don't worry too much if it's not perfect, because we are going to blend it together with the blender pen. So our blender pens have alcohol in them, and it just helps, like I say, to blend your colours together, get rid of some of those lines that you might have done that you don't want to be seen. And also in this case, just allows us to blend the two shades of brown together a bit better. And now onto my smaller deer. Okay, so that's all of my colouring done. So now we're going to get those stuck onto our card base. So I'm just sticking them on with Tombow. You could raise them up if you wanted to with dimensionals, that's entirely your choice. But I decided to keep the cards fairly flat. And I'm just going to make sure that when I stick it down, I've kind of got the spacing equal around them. And then I'm just going to do the same on this one. Just be careful with how much Tombow you put on, and that you don't go too close to the edge so that you don't get any glue steeping out. And obviously just try and make sure that you line them up as close as you can, getting them as straight as you can, and you can decide how close or how far apart you want to have them. And then I'm going to pop my bow down this side. On this card you can see that I put the sentiment down here, and then I have my bow just up at the top there. This one I did my sentiment up here, and I put my bow here, so you can choose where you want your bow to go. On one of them I tied a bow as normal. I've got some slightly different ribbon on this one, so I'm going to show you the technique that I did on the other one, because I actually ended up with a very small piece of ribbon that was impossible to tie a bow. So Tombow has its uses in lots of ways. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my ribbon. In fact, I think before I do this, I'm going to cut it just to make it a little easier on myself. And I'm just going to tie it in a knot around my Tombow. And then you're going to tie it again to tighten off the knot. So this is especially good if you have got any ribbon that's a bit awkward to tie in a bow, or if you've not got enough ribbon. So this is my loop that I've just made, and I'm going to cut it exactly in the middle like that. And then if you just rearrange your knot slightly, you'll see it start to look like a bow shape almost straight away anyway. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut at an angle on the top, and imagine that those are like my loops on my bow. Just be very careful because this does have a tendency to fray, this ribbon. And then I'm going to leave these ones down the bottom a bit longer. And then I'm just going to put a glue dot on my knot, and then that's ready to stick on. So I think because of this, wanting this to be a little bit different, I think I'm going to go with, I can't decide now. I think I'm going to go with my bow down at the bottom here, and then I might just make it a little smaller. Again, just being a bit careful because of the bits that tend to fray on this ribbon. And that's then finished. So if I just bring back my other examples, you can see how they vary ever so slightly. So there we go, got 3 slightly different versions, but all using the same principles. So you're going to need a card base, either the Sale-a-Bration ones, or you can cut a C6 card base from whatever shade of green you'd like to use, or of course a different colour if you prefer. Then you're going to need 2 pieces of basic white card, which measure 13 centimetres by 4 centimetres, and a piece of ribbon to match your sentiment. And then I have used Old Olive, early espresso and crumb cake inks, as well as using Cajun Craze and early espresso to shade in my deer, which I've blended them with a blender pen. So I will pop all of those details in the comments on the video too. If you've got any questions about anything, obviously drop me a message. If you'd like to order anything, you can drop me a message as well. And I can place that on an order for you. Or of course you can go to stampinup.uk and search for Claire Humphreys as a demonstrator. I hope you've enjoyed that card today. We'll have 3 more cards coming up over the next 3 weeks to get us well and truly sorted for Christmas, and I hope that you can join me then. Have a good week. Bye.